On this week's episode of the I-501CU, the podcast for nonprofit board members, I have the distinct pleasure of interviewing Matt George. And I'm looking in his bio right now doing this intro, and it's just too long to really even start. Matt is a former CEO of the Children's Home of Illinois, which was an amalgamation of a number of nonprofits that he brought together through mergers. He's written a book, The Nonprofit Game Plan, The Proven Strategy for Nonprofit Success. I'm reading it right now. It's an excellent book. He's a Harvard Business School coach and a nonprofit advisor. So join me and as I interview Matt George. Hey, everybody, this is Michael Corley. Just wanted to let you know we are now sending out a weekly, very brief newsletter, tips, tricks, pointers to nonprofit executives. That includes both board members and CEOs, executive directors. If you're interested in receiving this, please go to thecorleycompany.com/newsletter and you can sign up. Once again, that's thecorleycompany.com/newsletter. All right, on today's episode of the I-501CU, the podcast for nonprofit board members, I have the distinct pleasure of interviewing Matt George. Matt is a nonprofit advisor. He's an author, and he's also a Harvard Business School coach. But, he's got a tremendous career in the nonprofit space. So I hope everybody is going to enjoy today's conversation with Matt and what we're going to learn for those leaders out there. So, Matt, if you would, please start off by introducing yourself and tell us a little bit about how you became CEO and how you've come to doing what you're doing today.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on, Michael. This is quite an honor, and let's have fun. I've been in the nonprofit world, I feel like, since I was 16 years old. I had a friend of mine who had cancer, and I wanted to raise money for his family and help defray the costs of the funeral. And ended up in my first fundraiser at age 16, raised $3,000. And I remember the feeling of raising the money and giving the money to the family that was in need. And the feeling was great. And it never left me. And fast forward a few more years to college, I lived with my cousin, who was a famous football player at the time, Jeff George. He was a quarterback in the NFL for many years, and we were very, very close. And he had a lot of teammates that were eventual NFL players. And I learned early on the power of athletes, the power of good. And so we leveraged that. And so at age 20, I ended up raising over $250,000 for a cause that was related to cancer. And I brought in Walter Payton, who was my hero, and for the Chicago Bears. And I was 20 years old, and here I had his poster still in my room back at home. And here I'm sitting on stage with Walter Payton, and it just started the whole domino effect of making change, and really what I say now is changing lives and saving lives daily. And that's just the motto I've lived by since I was 16. And Jeff, going into the NFL, I was a year behind, and we went ahead and started his foundation. And so for a 10-year run, I worked with his foundation, raised money for causes all over the United States. And in turn, what was fun about it too is we actually did a lot of travel and helped other quarterbacks and played in their golf tournaments and raised funds all over the country. And in doing so, I was smart enough to start collecting and building my network. And fast forward now up to age 30, came back home to Illinois and decided that, I've been since age 21, I've been a CEO, a director of the foundation. And then I started running a place called Youth Farm, which is a boys' home. And so these kids were disadvantaged youth that were in the system, so to speak, and in the state of Illinois. And we did everything from behavioral health to education and you name it, and trying to get these kids to someday get back on track. Number one, and two, become productive tax-paying citizens is how I always looked at it.
Very good.
Then in 2007, I merged Youth Farm into what was now the Children's Home. And the Children's Home's been around for 158 years here in Illinois. It's the largest social service agency outside of Chicago. I had close to 500 employees, 50 plus programs, 1,700 kids a month flowed through this agency. And being the CEO there was a lot going on. There was everything from we had an autism school to behavioral health to foster care to working with really the streets of Middle Illinois. And it was probably one of the best experiences of my life. And I did that for a long time. And last year at age 52, I said, you know what, I'm going to step away after 30 years of being in my position, and we're going to kind of change routes. And now I'm going to help even more people. So what's fun about what I'm doing right now is I'm advising and business coaching all over the country and being able to help more people in more communities.
Matt, I got to jump in and ask you. So going back to age 16,
Yeah.
something special about you, something different. That's not normal for a 16-year-old. Fast forward 20, 21, those fundraisers, not normal. And
Right.
then your closest friend, your cousin's got this platform. You could have used that to make a whole heck of a lot of money, right? Investment, and people do that. Why is Matt different? Did you know, two questions. Why is Matt different? And did you know the nonprofit was going to be your future way back when you were 16, 17, 18, 19, 20?
I didn't know really what nonprofit was. I knew that for me, I was good in front of talking in front of people. I was good at organizing events, and I had the connections at an early age to be able to have people pick up the phone. And this was before cell phones. So this was, you pick up the phone. And I remember calling Walter Payton, and I left 10 messages with this foundation. And the funny story was I picked up the phone one morning. I was asleep, and he goes, "You're one persistent guy." And I said, "Who is this?" He said, "This is Sweetness. This is Walter Payton." I said, "You got to be kidding me." And 2 days later, I hop in my car and I'm driving up to Chicago. His foundation was on Gulf Road in Schaumburg in Chicago. And I get there and I waited an hour and a half in the waiting room. I think he did that on purpose because I was so annoying to him. And we struck a deal. And he said, "What do you want me to talk about?" I said, "I don't care. I mean, I really don't. I just want you there, man." And it was the coolest experience. And I knew after that event at age 20, I knew that there were people not able to do that, but I still didn't know what it meant. And
Right.
it's funny because I look back and it wasn't the money as much as that I left on the table. It was because I had cool experiences. I went to 7 Super Bowls. I went to the Olympics. I went to, I had access to just about everything sports or entertainment wise. But I do look back and think that from age 20 to 30 that I didn't do a good job of leveraging all of the relationships for 30 on. And that was a mistake. Now I still have some pretty strong connections, but athletes get old and kids today don't care about certain things. And so, it's what's current right now. So they're looking at, Djokovic and, all these guys. It's a different era and it kind of changed. But I did know this. I always cared about people. And I think that empathy piece really is what drives me. I truly believe it's servant leadership. I truly believe that servant leadership should be instilled in more leaders. And I really don't think, I think if you don't have empathy, I think there's a piece of being a leader that you're actually missing. And people are craving it. People are craving it.
So you have a really a stellar nonprofit career. We're going to talk a little bit about that. I'm holding up the book you wrote, The Nonprofit Game Plan, a proven strategy for nonprofit success. And I hope everybody goes and gets it. You can see I've dog-eared it and I've tabbed it because I'm in the process. I'm almost finished the book, and it's just fascinating, Matt, to follow you through the book. Why'd you write it?
Well, it's a kind of a cool story. I was Kevin Harrington is the original shark on Shark Tank, and he's the inventor of the infomercial. And And I saw him speak about 5 years ago, and he was peeling out back, so he didn't have to talk to people. He just peel off the stage, and he was gone. And I'm like, I know where he's going because I did this with all the athletes. So I found him and caught up with him, and I said, hey, my name's Matt George. I'm not asking for money, and I'm not pitching a product, but I do run a children's home in Peoria, Illinois. And he went, okay, well, what do you want? And I said, I have a couple questions for you, but I just don't want to talk to you on an escalator. Is there any way I can set up a call? And he goes, I'll call you in 2 hours. I gotta get on a plane. And I'm like, he isn't going to call me. And 2 hours later, he not only called me, he did a whole background check on me. He knew everything about me. And he said, why don't you be at this address at this time on this date if you're serious about it? And he goes, what exactly do you want? I said, I need a mentor. And he said, all right, if you're serious, come down. I didn't know where I was going. Ends up being a house. And long story short, we're just sitting there, and he says, Matt, you're going to write a book. And I said, okay. He picks up the phone. He calls the publisher. 9 months later, I had a bestseller on Amazon.
Love it. That's a good reason to write a book, I guess.
It was cool. It was the neatest experience to be able to go through a process with somebody like him, because I've had many mentors in my life, and I truly believe in that. But he's a driver. Like he'll tell you when you're not very good at something. Oh. And he'll be pretty strong and adamant about his words. And I love that because, at my age, I just don't need people to pat me on my back. I just need people. I want to learn every day. I want to get better every day. How do you do that? You have people that are going to push you and are willing to push you. And that's, the older you get, the harder that is.
Well, it is. And he sounds like a fascinating guy. His reputation is really a good one, and you're blessed to be working with him. But let me ask you this. So I read your book, and it's in you, beginning of this conversation, it's clear you have a big heart. But is that enough to be an effective nonprofit leader?
Well, I think that's a big piece of it, but I also think you have to know business. Their business and strategy, and you have to care for the people. And let me just explain something. I think all of your listeners know this, but mission driven really is not just about the agency or whatever the nonprofit is. It's about what's in people's hearts. So people, as an example, we had a conversation about your wife. She doesn't do it as a job, even though that's her job. She does it because not only is she good at it, she's passionate about it, and that's what sells. It's not that she's the best pitch person. It's because it's in her heart. And I think that's the piece that a lot of nonprofit leaders either have or don't have. So I always look at it two ways, and this is, there's nothing scientific about this. It was just my opinion, but I think there's program people that are good at running programs. And I also think, but I don't think those are CEOs necessarily. I think there is the business, and the business is what drives the people to perform and help drive the mission to help the kids or whatever it is. That if there's no compassion and passion from the people that are on the team, then whoever the clients are, let's just say they're kids, those kids are going to suffer. So you have to be able to sit here and say, if I'm going to get dinged 25% on a grant for the next 3 years, and this program is going to be, instead of $1 million program, I'm at 750. Well, typically you don't lay off somebody, or what you typically do is you just provide less services. Well, who gets hurt there? The mission, the clients, the kids. So it's my job as a CEO to make sure that it never gets to 750. A program person, it's harder for a program person to drive those dollars. And I'm not saying they can't, I'm just saying there's a negotiation tactic, there's a fundraising tactic, there's a personal brand tactic. So as a CEO, my personal brand raises money for wherever I'm at. I could go sell Girl Scout cookies, and my brand will sell, in my mind, more Girl Scout cookies than anybody. And that's just, over time, what I've learned is the effective leaders, the effective CEOs, presidents, CEOs, directors, whatever you want to call them, have a whole overall holistic approach to running a business. So if people don't think, nonprofits are business and we're just on our knees asking for handouts, they're crazy. Because I'll be honest with you, the revenue, annual revenue at Children's Home each year was $36 million. I mean, think about what the payroll is on that. So you could combine, I don't know, probably revenue-wise, 4 or 5 different chain restaurants, big chain restaurants, and still not have the revenue that we get. So you better understand how to run a business, is my point.
Well, I think that's very interesting. And you make a comment in your book, and you're starting to touch on this a little bit, and it's a direct quote, because a good nonprofit is run like a business. Can you just talk a little bit more than that? And also, my next question is, all right, when should a nonprofit not be run like a business?
So to run it like a business is important for several reasons. One, you have a board. So they have a fiduciary responsibility to be able to tend to not only the financial piece of it, but the risk piece of it. So there's a lot of risk involved, especially at a place like a children's home where there is 1,700 kids that are in the system in the state of Illinois that are doing all kinds of things. They're put in some tough situations. Some are homeless, people aren't eating. The list goes on. And then there's on the other side is, not only are we running the business, we had an endowment. So I was a fundraiser. So I had to go out and be the brand of wherever I was at, and I had to go raise money. And so when I go out and raise money, I had to have that person or corporation or foundation trust me when I made the ask, because anybody can make an ask for money, but not everybody can close. So then you have to close, and then you have to build that endowment or whatever it may be. So I knew in my career, I probably put on well over 250 fundraisers, and there's a responsibility there, but there's also a responsibility of having some heavy names, big names, good names tied to some very cool businesses, Fortune 500 and so on. So I had that responsibility. But then the business piece, you still have accounting, you still have HR, you still have every department that a normal business would have. As a matter of fact, turnover in social service agencies are very high. So HR has to be strong. In COVID, we could not take a day off. What was going to happen? So we had to manage 500 employees during a time where we still had to do in-home visits and we weren't allowed to go in the home. So there's just so many things tied to running the business that, in a way, it is similar to a hospital. You couldn't take a day off. You had to grind. You still had to make sure that your funding streams, we had over 50, that they were secured. And then you have to manage all of the revenue streams. So we had to go through program audits, federal audits, endowment audits. And so what part of everything I just said is not a business? I could even argue that there's more business in what we were doing than a typical business. And so, but most people, and this is what I write about, most people don't understand that. They just look at it as a charity. And that's not fair to all of the great people who I call heroes that work in the nonprofit world. Because if we don't have people working at a place like the Children's Home or the Boys and Girls Club or wherever it may be, United Way, hospital foundations, it could be anything. If we don't have those people, you don't even want to know what the outcomes could be, because you just can't even put your head into that space. And I had somebody ask me once, what would happen if there wasn't a children's home? And I said, you don't want to know. There'd be 1,700 kids on the street. So that's what would happen.
Yeah, and I appreciate you saying that. I've had the discussion with several people over the years. I'm a former for-profit guy, ran a company, knew nothing about nonprofits, and of course that's changed over the last 12 years as I've gotten into this space. And I've made the statement several times. It is much more challenging, dare I say, difficult to run a nonprofit than a for-profit, for the reasons you just stated.
Well, look at it this way. Here's how I looked at it. In the business that I ran, if we made a mistake, somebody might die. If you make a mistake at Burger King, you just lose a little money.
Absolutely.
That's the difference.
Yeah. Yeah. And the breadth of leadership capacity for nonprofit leaders, as you just articulated, is real. It's quite challenging. You got the volunteers, you got the donors. You really don't pick your customers, right?
No.
I mean, it's a societal issue you're trying to address. So it is quite challenging. At what times should a nonprofit understand they are a nonprofit and not be run like a business?
I don't know if there are any times. I think it always has to be run like a business, but I think if I kind of pushed a little deeper on that question, I would probably say when I'm speaking and I'm talking about the empathetic side of our business or the compassionate side of our business, or if I'm just talking about, for probably the last 10 years, the employees, the team, they're the most meaningful people. If you don't have the employees, the rest of the places it's irrelevant. And you have to, it's very hard to hire people. And you hear this in every business, but there are not kids dreaming right now saying, I can't wait. I want to grow up and be a special ed teacher. I can't wait. I'm going to be even an RN or a social worker or a child psychologist or a frontline worker. But here's the kicker. What if you don't have these people? So I think where I'm at in my life right now, one of the reasons why I'm going around, and I'm actually writing another book right now, and I'm going around and I'm talking about, we have to let these kids dream again. We can't have lack of teachers, lack of educators. We have to have people in our hospital systems. We have to have people in our nonprofit systems, in our school systems. And if we don't, we're in trouble.
So true. And, so I work with a lot of boards, as you know, and a lot of times we'll get into the conversation. You always ask a contrary question to help through the strategic thought process. Well, what if you closed down and went away? And it always comes back to quality of life for the community. It impacts a number of people, certainly, but what does that do to the community?
Yeah.
It's significant.
Yeah. Like I gave a talk yesterday to a group, and I said, I will argue and debate you, and you will lose on this question. The question is, do you think it's your job to take your community and put them under your wing and take care of it at all times? And if you say no, I'll debate you, because my whole point is I don't care if it's someone picking up trash or not littering or holding a door for somebody, or I don't care what the thing is, but it's your job. And so we live here, and I drive down the street and I see someone throw a bag of trash out the window. It drives me nuts. Why do you want to live in a community where you are adding to the problem. So that's another thing that I really talk about a lot is let's all take a step back and really kind of start over in our thought process of making sure that we take care of people. And I always, I said this in a talk recently. It's even at work, you have to have compassion and passion. You have to have passion for the job, but you have to have compassion. If I'm talking to you, Michael, and I don't know what's going on in your life, I don't know if you have a sister that's sick or your wife is struggling, or I don't know, but I have to have the compassion to actually care that something may be going on. Instead, we just jump to the conclusion all the time of Michael's just in a bad mood all the time. He's just, that's not fair. So that my whole nonprofit empathy piece right now is really just talking. And I talk to a lot of kids all the time to say, just take care of each other. Just take care of each other. It's very simple. Stop bullying. Stop mouthing. Let's have a fun life.
Well, you're exhibiting the characteristics that made you a very effective leader, and now I understand why you're doing what you're doing today. Let me ask you something. I'm going to get back to the book, and again, the Nonprofit Game Plan by Matt George. You discussed the benefits of competition and collaboration, both, which I thought was really interesting. That you need to have both in the nonprofit sector. Would you talk a little bit about why you think that and how that permeates?
Well, I'll start with collaboration. I think it's the most overused word, and people don't know what it means. And again, it's not an arrogant statement, but I'll debate you that there's no clear definition of collaboration. So if you have your community and you want the best for your community, shouldn't collaboration happen all the time? So do you think, like in my hometown, when we have all these kids at a children's home, do you think there are any different kids at the Boys and Girls Club down the street or the United Way or Big Brothers, Big Sisters? It's the same kids. So why wouldn't I want to see you succeed? And I know there's a lot of board members that listen to this, and I got into an argument once with a board member, and because what happened was, and then that person ended up not being a board member anymore because I was so adamant on my stance of this. They asked me, why do you raise money for other charities? I said, why wouldn't I? Like, I'm not getting paid for it. So I would MC. Every year I MC'd 7 to 10 events.
Okay.
And I would be an auctioneer. So I would auction the items off, and I knew how to raise money. So I found that if our kids were working with a group over here and this group was struggling, two things could happen. I could either use my power as being the biggest in town and really just swoop them up if I wanted to and, take them over, or I could do true collaboration and use my platform to help them raise money to help our kids, keyword our kids, and to make them successful. And I honestly, this person debated me in a board meeting, and I took that challenge, and this isn't arrogant either, but she lost, because the whole point of this is, and the whole point of the reason why you're in nonprofit work is to help people. It makes no sense to me. And so if I can help, so here's an example. This group was netting about $80,000 on an event. Well, I sat down with their CEO and I said, here's the problem with that. You spent 7 months working on this event. You probably really netted zero. Okay. So I said, I'll work with you. I'm going to volunteer my time. You need to get this up to $250,000. It took me 2 years, 3 years, get it up to $250,000. I peel off. I'm done. You don't need me anymore. And more leaders in communities, not just because you run a nonprofit, more leaders in communities need to step up and do that, because Now it's one of the biggest events in town. But that person, that CEO, did not know the blueprint to be able to take it and scale. There goes back to the business question. You have an event making 80 for 3 straight years, netting 80. You don't know how to scale a business. That's a program person, which is fine. We need program people, but you have to scale this so you can actually breathe. So when their program did get cut, which it did, they actually had money to backfill the program, and they didn't have to lay anybody off. So that's what I mean by that.
Matt, I think that's a great example and definition. And, and I could see that board member having that mindset and position, particularly if they're from the for-profit sector. I mean, there really is a difference in mindset with collaboration between the two sectors. Can you talk a little bit about competition within nonprofit? Because you said competition's good, which is interesting in your book. Could you elaborate on that?
Well, so my whole theory was that if I was going to have an event, or I was going to have the best event, and I was going to raise the most money. And if you sat there and thought any different as a competitor, bring it. I love that competition, and I hope you succeed. I want you to succeed, but I'm still going to strive to be the best at what we do. And I think there's competition. I'll just tell you a quick story about competition. I went into a presentation, and there were 3 groups that were presenting for about $200,000, and only one group was going to get it. And we were the most powerful group of the 3. And I saw this group get up and present, and it wasn't even similar to my business. It was about camps and for stroke victims, and the story that this person told and the need that they had was far greater than the need that we had. Now, we presented, and then at the end of the presentation, we withdrew. The reason we withdrew is because they needed it more. Even though that's the decision that a CEO should make. And my team could not believe it. And I said, listen, think about the people that are going to be hurt. If we lost and didn't get this funding, nobody's hurt. So we withdrew. And so that competition piece, even though I'm very competitive, there's also that empathy piece inside. And then you can take it a step further on competition, where you can talk about like mergers and acquisitions. I think everybody, especially boards, I think boards are worried about legacy, and they don't want to be, one thing board members don't want to do is either fire and hire a CEO, or they don't want to merge. They don't want to be part of it. They're too busy.
Right. You're right.
So those are the 2 things. But I actually think more nonprofits would be stronger for communities if they would actually take a step back and really look at their business. And are they making change like they say they're making change? And it's a hard question to ask. And I have a lot of theories on what should and shouldn't happen. But, what happens a lot of times is they know they should make change. They hold on too long to not making change, which equals dollars lost. And then, so in my career, I merged a total of 5 nonprofits together. And so there was a time I was actually worried that I was the M&A guy. So everybody, like, just stay away from him. He's going to come in. He's going to change.
Quick way to lose friends.
Right. But it's actually applauded by donors, because so if you're a big corporation, you're giving 100,000 over here and 100,000 over here, you're now giving only one or 100,000. But see, a true businessman or woman could go in and say, all right, here's the deal. I know I do need that too. We still are doing the same programming. We're actually expanding our program. And if we settle for 150 or so on, so my whole point in all this is, if you're not making true change in your community with your program, why are you doing it? So if you had 50 programs, you're telling me if you ranked them in order, then why do you have 48, 49, and 50? Like, that doesn't make sense to me. You wouldn't do that if you had a for-profit business. If you had 50 items for sale, and every year the 50th item comes up the same, you might have to re-look at why number 50 never sells, because nobody wants it, or it's not needed. It's the same thing with our programs. Do you need 8 after-school programs in a community? No. I could argue you need one good one with collaboration.
Very good. You, I'm sure if you gave a talk on that, you'd strike a nerve with people. But I think, listening to you, it really goes back to, it's about the community. What's best for the community? Are you humble enough as a leader to, and can you emotionalize and intellectualize that decision making that, yes, this is not our swim lane, or we're not good at this. Let somebody else do it. Or even merge. I just, it's such a rarity. But for you to exemplify that, I think paints a really good picture of folks. And let me ask you a little bit about merger. I want to get into the business side of a merger for the next few minutes. What conditions must exist for a merger to be the appropriate pathway?
There has to be, in my opinion, it starts with boards. So there has to be buy-in from a board member. There has to be the business case, the reason. What's the reason? It sure is nice when the director of both sides wants to talk. That's not usually the case. But in the case of, so I'll tell you, I'll use a quick example. In 2007, I was running Youth Farm, which is now part of Children's Home. I said that earlier. I went to Children's Home, who was 4 times bigger than Youth Farm. I met with my board chair and I said, you know what? The governor is changing our programs. And we only had 2. And if he changes our programs and doesn't fund X, we may have to look at shutting down in 2 to 3 years. So I went to the board and I said, are you okay if we start exploring? Now I did it. Exploring a potential merger. So I spent time studying and looked at 2 or 3 different potential suitors, finally found Children's Home, went into them. We started a conversation. It was the fastest merger. According to our attorney, it was the fastest merger he's ever put together. We did it in less than 90 days.
So get in a little bit of detail. Did you reach out to the CEO?
I reached out to the CEO and the board chair of
Did both.
Children's Home. And so my board chair, myself, their board chair, and their CEO, we all got together and started the conversations. And I remember their board chair, who I knew too, in our community, said to me, he said, do you know you're giving up your job? Like, you're not going to have a job. And I said, yeah, I do know that. But I'm going to tell you something. I have 56 employees and we had 50 kids. And my job, I'm confident enough I'll get a job somewhere. But I can't let these 50 kids go back into the system when I know they're safe under my management.
Sure.
They're safe. My ask to you is that you do everything you can to protect my team, but you 100% have to take on these kids and make sure they're safe. And that was the shake hand deal. And then we legally got it done. And it was it was probably and still is the biggest merger in nonprofit that's happened in Central Illinois. And that was in '07, and it was applauded. And I didn't do it for the pat on the back. But what I didn't realize too is that politicians and congressmen and all these people, I got letters from everybody saying, you fell on the sword for the right thing. And I really felt good about it. I really did. And I still, to this day, it was 100% the right decision. But I didn't have a job.
You didn't have the job. You made the right decisions. And yet you came back and lo and behold, you run the place.
Full circle. I'm a true believer things are meant to be. And that was a blessing for me because it changed my life even more, because we got to help more kids. We went from 1,700 kids a month, and there's a charge, there's a responsibility that you have every day, knowing that you have all these employees. See, I always used to say this. I used to tell my team all the time, and I'd say it every year. We'd have this big end of fiscal year meeting, and I said, it's not only my job to take care of all of you, but it's my job to take care of all of you and your families. And as a CEO, if you don't have that empathy and know that each one of these people that are putting their lives on the line, working in nonprofit work, that, in my opinion, probably shouldn't be a true leader, CEO.
Well, Matt, you certainly exhibited that, and it exudes in your wording today what it means to be I wouldn't even say a nonprofit leader. Really, it's a leader, and having a depth of understanding, accepting the responsibility, being inspired by that, and then growing as the organization grows. Matt, you wrote the Nonprofit Game Plan. Where can anybody get that book? Copy of the book if they'd like it.
Yeah, you can go on to Amazon and get the book, and it's appreciated. I give a lot of the proceeds back to Children's Home, and so it's I still love Children's Home, even though I'm not there anymore, and still in contact with the team, and I see them in our community, and when you've worked at a place that's been around 157, 158 years, you're just one person of thousands and thousands that have worked at this place, and to kind of put it in perspective. Children's Home was started 6 months after Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. That was a while ago.
That is too good. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you've enjoyed this as much as I have with Matt George. He's a nonprofit advisor. He's a Harvard Business School coach, author, and just sounds like one heck of a good guy. Matt, thank you for what you're doing in your community, and thank you for coming on to our podcast.
Well, I appreciate it. I hope your show is very, very successful, and let's get more people to not only listen to this show, but actually tell our kids to start dreaming and get into this work, because it's the best feeling you could ever have. So thanks for having me.
Right. Amen. All right. We just had a great conversation with Matt George, and this is the Recapping with Reed segment of this podcast. Reed, what are 3 observations or key points you'd like to share with the audience?
The first point is that Matt said, if you don't have empathy, there is a piece of being a leader that you're missing. You have to have empathy as a leader.
Absolutely right, for the reasons he described. Number 2.
When it comes to collaboration, if you want the best for your community, shouldn't collaboration be happening all the time? Shouldn't you be collaborating with similar organizations to make a larger impact?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And he eloquently stated that. Yeah, that's good, Reed. And number 3.
And then when it came to competition for organizations, as long as it doesn't impact collaboration, competition can be a great driver to try to have the best event, raise the most money, make the largest impact on your community, as long as it does not impact your ability to collaborate with other organizations.
Yeah, and even though he's very soft-spoken and has a genuine heart, you can tell he's very competitive with himself, wanted to always do the best, and that's really important for any leader. Ladies and gentlemen, there you have it, Recapping with Reed, 3 points from our conversation with Matt George. And we will I-501 see you next week